Good day, peasants. I see you are still lingering about, waiting for me to entertain you. Very well. Since I am already suffering through this miserably mundane day, anchored only by the dark, bitter perfection of my black coffee, sit down, cease your mouth-breathing, and try to keep up. I shall articulate slowly, though I doubt it will penetrate those thick skulls of yours. Our tragicomedy begins in the year 1998. The setting is India, where a man named Ratan Tata decided in a fit of inexplicable human optimism to embark on a quest to build his nation's first entirely indigenously designed passenger vehicle. The contraption was christened the Tata Indica. Now, one must remember that humans designing motor cars from scratch is an utterly ridiculous endeavor at the best of times. They poured a mind-boggling 1,700 crore rupees into this vanity project. And what was the glorious result of this monumental financial hemorrhage? Absolute rubbish. Upon its release, the Indica was a mechanical nightmare of the highest order. It vibrated violently enough to rattle the fillings out of one's teeth. The windows vehemently refused to wind up or down. And the engine was, quite frankly, appalling. It was a failure of epic proportions. Customers were enraged, violent complaints flooded in, and Tata Motors announced a devastating loss of 500 crore rupees. A complete disaster. Frankly, the glitchy, soulless mess of modern gaming has more structural integrity than the first iteration of that car. Give me the reliable, old technology of a nostalgic retro console any day of the week over such shoddy human engineering. Naturally, panic set in among the corporate suits. Advised by the cowards in his boardroom, Mr. Tata decided to abandon ship and sell the passenger car division entirely. And who did they turn to in their hour of desperation? The Ford Motor Company. Yes, the Americans. Bloody hell, even saying the name leaves a foul taste in my mouth like a soggy, lukewarm English pancake left out in the dreary rain. Ford executives, puffing out their chests like bloated, self-important pigeons, initially waddled down to Tata's headquarters in Bombay to sniff around the remains. Following this, in 1999, Ratan Tata and his team were summoned to Detroit, a city that is basically the automotive equivalent of a rusted rubbish bin. They sat down for a grueling 3-hour meeting with Bill Ford and his cadre of executives. What transpired next was an exhibition of sheer, unadulterated arrogance that makes my whiskers twitch with absolute disdain. Rather than conducting a civilized business transaction, the Ford executives chose to mercilessly mock and humiliate their guests. They sneered at Tata, asking, and I quote their dreadful nasal drivel, "You do not know anything. Why did you start the passenger car division at all?" They then had the absolute gall to declare that they would be doing Tata a big favor by purchasing the division. Can you fathom the audacity? The complete and utter lack of aristocratic decorum? I would sooner drop a perfectly good 99 cone onto a searing hot pavement than conduct business with such ill-mannered brutes. Ratan Tata, maintaining a stoic, dignified silence that those colonials could never comprehend, left the room. On the agonizing 90-minute flight back to New York, he did not utter a single word. He was deeply insulted, and rightfully so. But rather than capitulating to these Detroit buffoons, he did the only sensible thing. He packed his bags, flew back to India, and decided the deal was off. He would not sell his pride to Ford, nor would he let them have the satisfaction. Instead, he went back to the drawing board, ruthlessly fixed the dreadful contraption, and launched the Indica 5.2, which ironically became a roaring success. But that, my simple-minded audience, is merely the prelude. The true vengeance, the utter devastation of Ford's ego, was yet to come. Let us examine what the mighty, arrogant Ford Motor Company was doing while Ratan Tata was busy rebuilding his company's dignity. Ford, in a desperate bid to appear sophisticated, had been gobbling up European luxury brands like a glutton at a cheap buffet. They bought Jaguar in 1989 and swooped in to purchase our beloved aristocratic Land Rover from BMW in the year 2000. They lumped these magnificent British beasts, along with Aston Martin and Volvo, into a corporate blender they pretentious christened the Premier Automotive Group. Now, what does an American conglomerate do when handed the keys to the pinnacle of British automotive heritage? Do they respect the old technology, the bespoke engineering, the sheer majesty of it? Of course not. They completely and utterly butcher it. Ford decided that the best way to manage these esteemed brands was to apply their dreadful mass-market fast food mentality to luxury vehicles. It was, quite frankly, appalling. They stripped the soul right out of the factories. Rather than engineering proper aristocratic motor cars, they engaged in the vile practice of badge engineering. Do you comprehend the absolute rubbish they tried to peddle to the public? They took the Jaguar X-Type and built it on the chassis of a Ford Mondeo. Bloody hell. That is akin to taking a perfectly crisp, authentic English pancake, smothering it in canned spray cheese and calling it a delicacy. It was a catastrophic insult to anyone with a modicum of refined taste. Land Rover suffered equally under this regime. The vehicles became plagued with cheap plastics, electrical gremlins, and an overwhelming sense of mediocrity. Ford essentially treated British royalty the way modern publishers treat classic gaming franchises. Instead of preserving the nostalgic, pure, tactile joy of the original, they forced it onto a cheap, modernized platform completely devoid of charm or reliability, alienating anyone who actually appreciated the original masterpiece. It was utter nonsense. By trying to make these exclusive aristocratic vehicles appeal to the utterly tasteless suburban masses of Middle America, Ford destroyed the brand cachet. Predictably, the brilliant human minds in Detroit began hemorrhaging money. Billions of dollars were incinerated in this fool's errand. They had bloated their portfolio, cheapened their products, and created a logistical nightmare. The Premier Automotive Group became a financial black hole. By 2007, the very executives who had sneered at Ratan Tata were sweating profusely through their cheap suits. Their hubris had finally caught up with them, and their empire of plastic and shared platforms was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own spectacular incompetence. We arrive at the glorious year of 2008. The global financial crisis strikes with all the grace and devastating finality of a corrupted save file on a vintage gaming cartridge. The American economy collapses, and Detroit, that monument to human hubris, is suddenly drowning in its own debt. Ford was hemorrhaging cash faster than an otter diving for a prized silver salmon. They were desperate, terrified, and on the verge of complete and utter ruin. To save their own miserable skins, Ford's executives realized they had to liquidate their assets. They put their Premier Automotive Group on the chopping block. And who, pray tell, emerges from the shadows, impeccably dressed and practically glowing with quiet, vindictive wealth? Ratan Tata. Smelling the blood in the water, Tata Motors swooped in. In a move of absolute calculated brilliance, they offered to purchase Jaguar and Land Rover. In June 2008, the deal was struck for a staggering $2.3 billion in cash. a sum of money you peasants could not possibly fathom if you lived 1,000 miserable lifetimes. But here is the pièce de résistance, the moment of supreme aristocratic vengeance. During the finalized meetings, the very same Ford executives who had mercilessly mocked Ratan Tata 9 years prior, the ones who sneered that they would be doing him a favor by buying his passenger car division, were now singing a drastically different tune. Bill Ford himself, or his groveling representatives, looked Tata in the eye and whimpered the exact same words. But in reverse, "You are doing us a big favor by buying Jaguar Land Rover." Bloody hell, the cosmic irony is richer than a proper thick English pancake drowning in golden syrup. The mighty Americans, reduced to begging the Indian conglomerate they had previously dismissed as incompetent. It was an utterly magnificent serving of karma, served as cold and brutal as a British winter. Now, any ordinary spiteful human might have purchased these brands simply to strip them for parts or dismantle them entirely out of petty revenge. But Mr. Tata operated with a level of class and sophistication that is, quite frankly, appalling by modern corporate standards. When Tata took the reins, what did he do? He did something the Americans were too arrogant to ever consider. He left the British alone. He provided the necessary capital, severed the dreadful shared platforms with cheap Fords, and allowed the brilliant British engineers and designers to return to their roots. He respected the heritage. He understood that you do not compromise luxury with mass-market rubbish. It was a return to the ethos of old technology and bespoke craftsmanship, the very things that made the brands aristocratic in the first place. And the result? Absolute, undeniable triumph. Freed from the suffocating, cost-cutting grip of Detroit, Jaguar Land Rover underwent a massive renaissance. They launched spectacular, highly desirable vehicles like the Range Rover Evoque and the Jaguar F-Type. They went from being a massive financial sinkhole for Ford to generating record-breaking, multi-billion-dollar profits for Tata Motors. They became the crown jewel of the Tata Empire. Meanwhile, Ford spent the next decade licking its wounds, begging the American government for bailouts, and continuing to churn out uninspired plastic boxes for the suburban masses. The moral of this painfully long story? There isn't one, because human beings are incapable of learning from their mistakes, but it does prove that genuine class, patience, and a refusal to build absolute rubbish will always triumph over arrogant, loud-mouthed incompetence. There, the saga is complete. I have painstakingly walked you through every miserable detail of this corporate embarrassment. I'm now entirely exhausted by your presence. I shall be retiring to my private study to enjoy a proper plate of fish and chips and immerse myself in some nostalgic retro gaming, an era before you humans ruined everything with microtransactions and sheer mediocrity. Do not follow me. Cheerio.